everyone. Have I started my... I don't think I've started my July reading wrap-up, so welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and here we are wrapping up July. Reading for me in the last couple months has been a little crazy. My life has been a little crazy. So the first finish that I had for July was Riverwalking, Reflections on Moving Water by Kathleen Moore, and this is part of my Rivers TBR, which is a separate TBR from my monthly TBRs. This is a book of essays. This is Kathleen Moore is a philosophy professor, but also an avid nature enthusiast. So her and her family of four are the subject of most of these essays, and they travel extensively to different rivers and bodies of water, camping, in their canoes, moving down the rivers, like very much living in nature, like I would say roughing it in a lot of ways. But these essays are also about, your children growing up and you letting them go. There was one essay that I really particularly loved where she just talks about her neighbor and the relationship she had with this elderly woman who was her neighbor, and how the life of the street that this elderly neighbor's generation moved into, and that her and her family were now living in, this kind of evolution of a street and evolution of homes, and the simple little relationship that she had with this woman who was then leaving to move into an old folks home. And I thought it was very compelling and beautiful, and it was just this simple essay about a really small part of your life, but these encounters that you have with random people in your lives who seemingly can come in and be there for a few years and then leave, and how it really for me touched on the fleetingness of time, and how we lose these little moments and we don't remember even these people that could be such a significant part of our lives for a brief period. So I thought that was really good. What else in here? I mean, there's some beautiful passages. I love Kathleen Moore's writing. She doesn't tend to bring in a lot of philosophical abstract thinking into her work. One of the essays that I also really loved was her talking about being a philosophy student and having an encounter with a professor who made her feel shame for the way she was writing and for the way she was including a personal narrative in her work. And he, put that down and said, that's not what philosophy is, and you shouldn't be writing this way. I'm very much paraphrasing there. I think that's what the gist of it was. And she lived on for many years feeling that she had done things wrong, that she wasn't processing things correctly. But then you read these essays that have this personal narrative worked into them in such a beautiful way, so compellingly. And then you think, wow, like he was wrong. Like there is a way to write about philosophy, but also include a personal narrative. And so anyway, there's a lot of great gems in here. I wouldn't say I loved it as much as Wild Comfort, which is a later book of essays of hers that I read and that is more centered around grief. But these are really wonderful. I think if you like nature writing, you should definitely check this out. There's a wonderful balance between science, nature, philosophy, and personal narrative that I think I just think she's a wonderful writer, and I will keep reading her essays. She's probably one of my favorite essay writers that is out there that I've read. So this is my first finish of July, and I will check in again when I have finished another book that I can talk about in this vlog. If you're following along for BookTube Prize books, there are separate vlogs for those. So I am reading those right now, but I'm not including them in my general monthly wrap-ups. Hey everybody. All right, so I was in I was traveling when I finished Austen Years by Rachel Cohen, and I forgot to wrap it up, so I'm going to wrap it up right now. So I listened to this on audio, and it was a really interesting read overall. But I would say for me, it felt quite disjointed in terms of the different subjects that she was covering in a memoir. It was quite long. It was a 10-hour audiobook. And I feel like it was actually 2 books put together. So what I think would have been more successful about the book is if it would have been divided up differently. So in one side, you have her reflections on 5 Jane Austen novels: Emma, Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Mansfield Park. And so she kind of does some analysis of the characters and the scenarios that are going on in those novels. She talks about her own journey over 5 years of reading those books, like kind of obsessively. So like rereading and rereading the same pages and passages and sections of the books, and really like analyzing the text and like interpreting it. So that was kind of one part of the story. And then there was also Jane Austen related history and biography included as well. So when she was writing these different books, where she was living, the comments her sister Clarissa made about them, when they were published, how they were published, etc. So that's all included in one side of the book. And the other side of the book is the memoir portion, which is Rachel's own family remembrances. And I think this happens in memoir, and it's kind of a common problem that some authors, I find, have a hard time separating what is their own personal history and what is interesting and meaningful for them in terms of their relationships with their family, and what translates well into something that the reader would enjoy learning about. And so on this side of it, I found that especially her musings about her father got too wrapped up in her own sentimentality about her father and didn't actually translate well into something that the reader could take away. So she jumped the timeline a lot, and I found that frustrating as well. So she jumps the timeline about her father's death. We move through the different stages of her father's death, her father's life, her relationship with her father's reputation. And so that whole section to me felt like it could be its own book about her father and her relationship with her father. It didn't blend very well with the stuff about Jane Austen. And it got very tedious to me because she'd go through a very elaborate description of her father's death and funeral, and I think, okay, we've finished with the father, we've wrapped up her feelings about her father. No, they'd come back into another section and we'd go back to when he was still alive or he was dying, and we'd hear another story. And I was like, that doesn't really work for me in terms of the flow of the book. And I just found that there were things that she shared about her father that were not that interesting. It was very sweet, and you could tell that she loved her father and had a wonderful relationship with him. But again, that's not necessarily interesting to a general reader. It's something that is interesting to you and your family, and it means something to you and your family. But it's not necessarily going to translate in a book that everyone can relate to it and that everyone finds it compelling enough to read about. So I feel like the book could have been edited more thoroughly. There could have been 2 separate books really in this whole thing. That's not to say that I didn't find her family stuff compelling and interesting. It was. Not all of it. A lot of it was though. But yeah, I think it felt like she wanted to write a book and she just threw all of it in. And it doesn't necessarily work very well. So yeah. I think it was good. I enjoyed learning about her perspectives on the Jane Austen stories and the biography information about Jane Austen. And I think that learning how these books gave her comfort in a time of sadness, that her father's death and in the birth of her children, was good. But again, she could have pinpointed it a bit more. She could have really talked about what those books meant to her in terms of those things. And I feel like that didn't really come across very clearly to me either. It was the books and reading the books. It was being obsessed with the books. She related other authors' memoirs and obsessions with Jane Austen in there as well. And then it was the stuff about her father and her family. So they felt very disjointed to me overall. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that book. Thanks. I'll be back with more later. Hey everyone, I finished Riverwoman by Katherena Vermette, and this is a poetry collection. Katherena Vermette is a Métis writer and poet based out of Manitoba, Canada, and I thought this was very good. I really enjoyed especially the poems that were more related to nature and the river, and she had some poems in here that were more like love poems, just kind of general poems, but the ones that were nature related were my favorites. And yeah, I think this is a great little volume of poetry, and it made me really excited to read her novel The Break, which has been very popular in Canada, and I just need to get to that really soon. I just wanted to add a little thing here, and that is that July was super chaotic for me, and so my reading really reflected that. I didn't get that much reading done. And most of it actually I did for the BookTube prize. So, you know, I had 2 pretty long books for the BookTube prize, and that's why I didn't get much other reading done. I did not get to one of the books that I put in my TBR, whose name is right now escaping me. That's the way my brain is right now. It's very warm here. But I did just want to tell you that I did listen to a BBC adaptation of Persuasion by Jane Austen. It's not the novel because it's only 3 hours. So it was a theatrical for radio adaptation, and I enjoyed it. It was good. I think I understand where people are coming from in liking Persuasion. I think it has a different feeling to it from Austen's earlier work. So yeah, I thought it was good. The reason I listened to that one and not one of the full novel, which I think is closer to an 8-hour audiobook, was because it wasn't available when it was time for me to go, and I wanted to read it in July because it's Jane Austen July, and so I just took that BBC adaptation and thought I would listen to that. To me, it's very similar to watching a film adaptation. I haven't been hearing very good things about the film adaptation to Persuasion that's on Netflix, that's the newest one. So I thought that that would be a good way to consume the material. And yeah, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the story, and I don't think I got the full experience of the novel. It definitely felt abbreviated, but I think I have a good idea of the story, and I think in future I may read it again or listen to it again. So I just wanted to let you know that that's how Jane Austen July went for me, and now you can go ahead and see the rest of my books as I wrap them up. And yeah, July is what it is. Hey everybody. Okay, I finished Paris to the Moon by Adam Gopnik. This was from my 5-star predictions list. for 2022. And this is a memoir about Paris. It is set in the years 1995 to 2000. And Adam Gopnik is a journalist and a writer who I believe sent his ramblings about Paris to the New Yorker while he was living there. And so that was, you know, part of his experience of living there. So there were some sections, some chapters that I really enjoyed reading, his impressions, especially the ones relating to his family. His son was a newborn or a young baby when they moved there. And he moved there with his wife and son, and then eventually they have a daughter as well. So I enjoyed those chapters. There was also a chapter about some French history relating to a trial of one of the former French members of the government who did some questionable things during World War II. And so that related some World War II history that I didn't know about France. So that was really interesting. But there were a lot other chapters that I found just, I didn't know the references. I didn't know the cultural figures he was referring to. I didn't know, I didn't pick up on the humor probably as much as I could have, because the humor was relating to things that would have made sense to someone of his age, an American in Paris at that time, and just didn't make sense to me from my lived experience. So so overall, you know, I'm glad I read it. It was really interesting. But I think, you know, whenever you're reading a memoir and then it's kind of set in a previous time, there's often a lot of references to things that you don't know what they are. And I'm not really the type of person when I'm reading a book like this to go and Google everything, because I just, you know, it takes you way longer to read the book when you're taking every name and reference and trying to Google it. So that kind of removed some of the experience for me. And also there were just parts of it that reflected his interests that didn't really reflect mine. So there's some baseball talk in here, and whenever we talk about baseball, my eyes glaze over. I'm just not really into baseball. And then some other things like that just, you know, some people would find really interesting, and for me, I was just like, not that interested. But you know, that's kind of normal for this type of a book. So yeah, overall, I'm glad I read it. And that is the end of my reading for the month of July. I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.